We're now going to delight to have Roei from magniX, who are taking electric aviation in a very different perspective to the eVTOL. And so I'm going to hand over to you now, Roei.
So magniX is designing and building electric propulsion, motors, inverters, and the control software, and we're doing so with a focus on commercial aviation. So when we look at what the future of electric aviation looks like, we segment it from a propulsion perspective into three sectors. One is what we've been hearing about all day today, is inner city. They'll call it first and last mile, the 25 to 50 mile range flights. Mostly will be served by kind of the various elements of eVTOLs, et cetera, that are being discussed today. That's one segment. The other, on the complete other extreme, are flights 1,000 miles or more, across the United States, cross Pacific, cross Atlantic, et cetera, trying to replace aircraft like the 737, the A330, et cetera. There we're probably talking a generation away before we can even talk about true electric. We'll probably have hybrid there first in the next 10 years. Where we really focus is what we call the middle mile, the transportation system between 100 and 1,000 miles that currently is not necessarily where it should be. So the middle mile aviation is not working today. In general, these are distances that people either have to drive anywhere between 3 to 8 hours to get from point A to point B, or if you're lucky enough to live in a place like Japan where you can do Tokyo to Osaka over 300 miles in 2.5 hours taking a bullet train, then great, but most of the rest of the world don't have that privilege. Or you're relegated to commercial aviation. And the challenge with commercial aviation and distances between 100 to 1,000 miles is the following. One, airlines don't make money in these ranges. What they do is they move away from the smaller seat aircraft. We've seen degradation of the number of flights that are done at under 50 seats rapidly, and aircraft are now going, or airlines are going to aircraft 75 seats or above. What that means when doing these short, call them regional middle mile routes, is that either the price goes up or there's simply no flying. So again, you're relegated to driving. Now that wouldn't be so bad, except for the fact that the economy is moving to what's called today the on-demand economy, which means people want to be able to fly from point A to point B when they want to. I'll give you an example. I'm based out of Seattle. About 250 miles away from Seattle is a small regional city called Spokane. Seattle is missing 5,000 open positions in software development. Amazon, Microsoft, et cetera, desperately searching for software engineers and can't find them. Spokane, 250 miles away, has 3 universities in the city, all of which offer computer science and engineering development programs. Except there's a big disconnect between the two. People in Spokane like the more open living space, lower cost of living, easier quality of life, and don't want to move to Seattle where you have congestion, pollution, crowdedness, high cost of living. Except going between the two in a 6-hour drive doesn't make sense. If you work in a company that's based in Seattle and you're looking to open another engineering center, Spokane isn't your first choice. Why? Because getting there is a headache. You have flights once an hour on something like an Embraer 175 or 737, and if you're flying on demand, like a business person normally does, as in I'm today wanting to go visit my team tomorrow, and I checked this morning, if I wanted to fly there tomorrow, I would be paying $800 return for a 250-mile trip. So that's unreasonable either. So the middle mile, the 100 to 1,000 miles of flight, have become very painful. Airlines are moving away, costs are very high, and then you have a significant portion of cities, towns, et cetera, that could provide either a phenomenal talent pool or a great place to expand your business, but are left untapped and unutilized. You can also look at the flip side. When you're living in a large metropolitan city, and the first last mile is your only concern, while driving in a congested environment may not be the best and creating that pollution is not the best, you can still get your Amazon packages in 2 hours. Right? You're not worried about delivery not coming in on time. If you live 250 miles away, or I would even suggest 100 miles away from the city of San Francisco, you don't get Amazon deliveries in 2 hours. You don't even get them with Prime in 2 days. You're in 5-day delivery world. Why? Because driving the truck isn't practical, and flying there with a small cargo plane is simply too expensive. So what we look at is the 100 to 1,000 miles. Now, when you think about that, that doesn't sound like a lot. Today, we look at magniX at the path of converting and using electric aviation in two paths. Small to medium-sized aircraft. We're talking about Cessna Caravan and above, or aircraft that have been designed from the ground up, pun intended, to be all electric. Usually you'll see in an all-electric fixed-wing aircraft, the motors are pushers, or the propellers are pushers versus pullers that you would see on a traditional aircraft. But that's the market we're focused on. So when you look at something like a Cessna Caravan or a Twin Otter or a King Air, the 90 specifically, that use today a Pratt & Whitney PT6 at about 750 horsepower, you can convert them to an all-electric in about 2022 and be able to fly up to about 250 miles with today's battery technology. If we look at what some of the research has shown with technology that will be ready by 2022, you might be able to do something like 400 miles. That's for converting a current aircraft that wasn't designed or built for electric propulsion. If you look at electric aircraft, for example, there's a company in Israel called Eviation developing an aircraft that's an all-electric aircraft. They're talking about taking 9 passengers 650 miles in 2022 or 2023. And that's with, again, today's battery technology. So when you think about 250 miles, that doesn't sound like a lot. But if you look at some of the charts here, there are 3 circles in each one of these major metropolitan areas. The smallest one is 100 miles in range. The medium one is 250 miles. And the last one, the largest circle, is 500 miles in range. So we're not even getting to the 1,000 miles in range. We're talking purely 100 to 500 miles in range. And you can see that you have pretty significant coverage. If you're in somewhere like going out of New York, which you wouldn't leave out of JFK or LaGuardia, but you leave from one of the small airports or airfields around that area, you can cover pretty much what you need on the northeastern or eastern seaboard. If you're in a place like San Francisco, you can go quite a distance with 250 miles. Think of a small town like Bakersfield. Great airport, has some nice businesses there, but if you had to drive there from San Francisco or from LA, it's a day's drive to get to a business meeting and a day's drive back. To fly from San Francisco to Bakersfield, I have to do a stop in the middle and spend about $600 to $700 return if I buy the ticket for today or for tomorrow. If you add all electric, that changes the proposition. Again, less than 250 miles away, we could redefine, we as an industry could redefine what it means to live in the suburbs. It should no longer be a 1-hour drive or 1.5-hour drive in a commute. It could be a 1-hour flight. Or it's actually less than a 1-hour flight, but door to door 1 hour. Again, using traditional fixed-wing aircraft from traditional runways and airfields, just not the major metropolitan ones. If you cross the ocean and look at a place like Europe, 250 and 500 miles takes you a long way. If you look at Zurich, which today is one of the busiest business aviation airports in the world, at 500 miles, you can get to almost anywhere you need to in Europe with an all-electric aircraft. So that's why when we look at where does electric aviation go, we really focus on that middle mile, because the over 1,000 miles is still fairly far away. The eVTOLs are great, just not for us. Much smaller motors, smaller distances, different technology. The motors don't have to be liquid cooled, they can be air cooled, much smaller distances. When you're looking at trying to fly 250, 500 miles on a commercial aircraft, again, defined as an aircraft built for commercial operations, 9, 10, 15, 20 passengers, or the equivalent of cargo, you're now talking about significantly larger amounts of power and flying in altitude. Air-cooled won't work, you have to be liquid-cooled. Liquid-cooled motors could weigh more. That's why that's our focus on being able to do that. Just as a final point on the fact that this is becoming real as opposed to CAD drawings, we've been running our 350 horsepower motors for the last year for over 1,000 hours in a test cell against the dyno. So they've been working for over 1,000 hours, delivering 350 horsepower in a 53 kilogram motor, about 110 pounds, turning at 2,500 RPM, very low speeds, creating over 1,000 Newton meter of torque from the second you turn the motor on. Last week was a cool week for us. We turned our first propeller. So we have a Cessna Caravan Ironbird in our facility. We have an engineering facility in Australia, a Cessna Caravan Ironbird. with a 350 horsepower motor on it. Took a Cessna 208 propeller from Hartzell, and we turned it last week for the first time, and we're now running tests on that Ironbird as well to see a full system versus just the motor in the size and shape of a Caravan. The next thing we're going to do is take that same technology, and we're in final stages now of building our 750 horsepower motor. 750 horsepower will be double the size of this 350, which you see takes about a quarter of the space that the PT6 will take on the Caravan. And at 750 horsepower, that is a PT6. 220 pounds, turning at 1900 RPM, which if you look into it, happens to be the speed in which the Cessna Caravan propeller turns. No gearboxes, no maintenance, none of those issues exist. And again, working with an existing traditional fixed wing, albeit much less sexy than an eVTOL. But for practical purposes, very efficient and works wonders. So I'll stop here and happy to take questions.
Does the application work for something like a skydiving vehicle?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Skydiving, we've actually had some conversations with both operators of skydiving locations and manufacturers of skydiving aircraft. It actually works phenomenally well. Because of the powerful torque that you get off the motor, you can get to altitude much faster than you can with traditional aircraft or traditional motors. So from that perspective, it works very well. Second thing is that the nature of skydiving operations, we can charge the aircraft just the amount needed in order for them to take off and land. So they're less concerned with range as they are speed to get the divers up, speed to get down and do those cycles. I'm a skydiver myself, so I look forward to that day.
So is the plan for you to do only battery operated or think maybe hybrid in the future also?
Really, really good question. So as a propulsion company, again, we're focused on motor inverter software. And we want to be fuel, if you will, or power agnostic. Currently, we're working with batteries, so our Ironbird is battery driven. So we're using that. But if it's hydrogen fuel cells or a traditional generator in the back that uses fuel, we're agnostic to it. We ourselves are not building a hybrid aircraft or a hybrid system. We're not sure that that's where the focus should be, at least for ourselves and in these ranges. But if someone wants to take our electric propulsion system and have it driven or powered by a generator, it'll work.
In the case of the Caravan, where would you put the batteries? Underneath?
Yes. So underneath the floor. So there's the nice thing about the Caravan, and the first thing where we believe it'll probably be very operational is either short distance passengers, so 50, 60 miles in range, which if you look at a Caravan is what a lot of the operators, especially on floats, do, and cargo. The beauty of the Caravan, similar to the King Otter, is that they run out of volume way before they run out of weight. So when we looked at the Caravan as an aircraft, from that perspective, being able to load the floor or underneath the floor and redo a little bit of the cargo carrier to carry the batteries really provides for additional value. The second, if you look at which is no longer there, okay, the motor is significantly smaller than what the traditional motor is. And that leaves space for an emergency battery. So we believe that an emergency battery has space, a different technology battery that maybe needs less cycles. I mean, going back to skydiving, my reserve parachute, while it's still a parachute, is very different in its build. It's used once or twice and then you replace it. Similarly, you could use a reserve battery for emergency onlys versus use a traditional.
Any thoughts to put an APU in because of the extra engine space and have a hybrid concept?
We have not looked into that for the simple reason that we don't want to get into the hybrid business space. The engineering that's required to do hybrid is complex already on its own. Two, once you go out with a hybrid, I mean, it's nice that we talk about it as a temporary solution. Once you've provided a hybrid solution to a customer, you need to support that hybrid solution for the length of that aircraft, for the life of it. And if that's 10 or 15 years, if that's the expected, then you have to have a whole infrastructure supporting hybrid when your intent was for it to be temporary. So we're taking the approach that Tesla took, if you will, which is battery technology is not where we want it to be. Neither is hydrogen fuel cells, which I think has some phenomenal potential. But once you have the pull from companies like ourselves, Siemens, who are also doing the same in terms of size of motor for commercial operations. Once you have the pull, we believe the battery technologies or power technologies, be it battery, fuel cells, et cetera, will follow just like they did with cars. And if we're wrong, then we're going to it ourselves. But doing hybrid means you're committing for the next 10 to 15 years to supporting a platform that you believe to be temporary.
Great. And there's a quick question on the board. Who are you partnering with now? Are you talking to any of the traditional?
So we're completely self-sufficient at this point. So we design, build, test the whole thing on our own. We are in conversations with both traditional and new OEMs and engine manufacturers, but we're not currently partnering with any of them.
Another question just coming. It's coming from the back first.
Yeah.
Actually, while you wait, very quickly, are there any center of gravity issues?
So there would be if you didn't plan for it, right? The motor is much lighter than what would be traditional. Batteries on the floor can help you eliminate center of gravity of issues, and what you really have to worry about is the nose, making sure the front of the aircraft is as heavy as it is now. That's if you don't want to make any structural or engineering changes, which we don't. We want to make this conversion as easy as possible for operators and OEMs. So you just, in quotation marks, have to add weight to the front nose, which you can once you start adding some batteries in there for extended range. So there are issues that have to be resolved, but there are easy resolutions for them.
Two questions, short ones. First, what's unique about your motor compared to what's available in the market today? Second, how many of the smaller motors do you have in the field as we speak?
Yeah, really good question. So there's only one other company that I at least know of that does 350 horsepower motors, and that's Siemens, which have them on test aircraft and test cells as well. So I only know of us two. That doesn't mean that others don't exist, but to my knowledge. And in the field, we don't have any. Remember, we're still in development. So we have some on test cells, and now we have some on Ironbirds, but none are out there flying.